Hello everyone. I'd like to start today's class with a few pictures. This is a picture of Greek god of dreams and he's called as Morpheus. Next shows the picture of poppy seeds. This is the poppy flowers and this is the picture showing an IV drug addict. With that, we'll start today's topic, that is opioid analgesics part 1. The Before we go into the topic, I would like to just have a very short recap of the pain pathway from the first year. You all are well aware of this pathway, but just to have a revision, just go very fast with the pain pathway. So you know that whenever there's an injury, it activates the pain receptors or the nociceptors. The pain signal travels through A delta and C fibers, and these fibers enter the spinal cord via the dorsal root ganglion and then synapse in the dorsal horn, the substantia gelatinosa. You can see it here, gelatinosa. And the second order neuron, they cross to the opposite side of the spinal cord, and then the signal goes through the spinothalamic tract to the thalamus, and then it is from there to the somatosensory cortex where the pain is felt by the brain. Now, once the cerebral cortex detects the pain, the signal then travels to the periaqueductal gray in the midbrain, and that activates the substantia nigra and other brainstem centers. The signals then go to nucleus raphe magnus in the medulla, and these send descending fibers to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. And this descending pathways, they release serotonin, they release noradrenaline, they release endorphins, which inhibit the pain pathway. Which inhibit the pain transmission. This is the way the pain is actually controlled normally in the body. So you can localize the important areas that are involved in the pain pathway. You can see substantia gelatinosa, periaqueductal gray, and then you can have the all the thalamus and the somatosensory areas, and the ascending and the descending pathways. You have learned enough about this in the physiology classes, so I'll not be elaborating further. Now let us look at the learning objectives for this class. The first is to differentiate opioid analgesics from the other set of analgesics which you have already learned, that is the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Then we'll be learning about the opioid receptors in detail. Then we'll classify the opioid agonists with examples, and very importantly, we are going to learn about the mechanism of action, actions, adverse drug reactions, precautions, contraindications, and uses of morphine. Morphine is very important from the clinical aspect as well as the examination point of view, and that is why you should be very equipped and about every aspect of morphine. So the other names for opioid analgesics are narcotic-like analgesics and or the morphine-like analgesics, and how they are different from NSAIDs. So these have only analgesic action, whereas you already have learned that NSAIDs, along with the analgesic action, they also have antipyretic and anti-inflammatory action. The opioid analgesics depress the CNS. They can cause sedation, tolerance, and dependence, and they also have addicting and abuse potential. All these features are typically absent in NSAIDs. Then these opioid analgesics, they act via opioid receptors, which are a kind of the G protein coupled receptors. You have already learned in detail about G protein coupled receptors. So opioid receptors are of 4 types: mu, kappa, delta, and nociceptin, which is actually an orphan receptor. Further, the subtypes of the mu receptors are mu1, mu2, and then kappa 1, kappa 2, kappa 3, delta 1, and delta 2. Of all these receptors, it is very important that you know the details about the mu receptors. And these neuroopioid receptors are present abundantly in the pain pathway, especially the areas like periaqueductal gray, substantia gelatinosa, and spinal cord. And the endogenous opioids like enkephalins, endorphin, dynorphin, these are the endogenous painkillers, you can say, that is already there in the body, and they are acting via these opioid receptors, and most of the actions of the opioids are mediated through the mu receptors as compared to the kappa and delta receptors. So let us just have a look at the pathway of the opioid receptors. So already you have learned that the G protein coupled receptors, they function through various transducer pathways. And similarly, the opioid receptors, which are a kind of G protein coupled receptors, they function through either decreased cyclic AMP production or by opening of potassium channels and further causing hyperpolarization, or inhibition of the opening of calcium channels. This is already learned in the G protein coupled receptors, that they are actually either adding through acting via the adenyl cyclase pathway, resulting in the cyclic AMP modulation, or by the opening or inhibition of channels. So here it is via decreased cyclic AMP production, opening of potassium channels, and inhibition of opening of calcium channels. And all these result in the decreased release of neurotransmitters involved in pain pathway. Okay. Now you can see that the mu receptors, I'll just show you the location. So you can see that they are abundantly present in the area which are involved in pain. And if you look at the functions, they cause supraspinal and spinal analgesia. That is the first and foremost function. It is mainly mediated by the mu1. Then other than that, they can also cause respiratory depression, euphoria, sedation, meiosis, constipation, and dependence. So why I'm mentioning the functions here is because when you're going to learn about the drugs which are agonists on the mu receptors or opioid receptors, you will end up having function actions. All these actions will be there in those drugs. That is why it is very important to know the functions of the receptors. The kappa and delta functions are also kind of very similar to that of mu, but please concentrate on the mu functions, because most of the opioid analgesics, they are acting by stimulating the mu receptors. So once again, supraspinal and spinal analgesia, respiratory depression, euphoria, sedation, meiosis, constipation, dependence. So you will see all these actions when you're going to learn about morphine and other agonists. You will see these actions coming up with these drugs. Now let us see the classification of opioid receptor agonists. So these are drugs which are stimulating the opioid receptors, mainly the mu receptors. So under this, we have got the natural opium alkaloids, which includes morphine and codeine. Then semi-synthetic opioids, diacetyl morphine, otherwise called as heroin, codeine, ethyl morphine. Synthetic opioids, which are pethidine, otherwise called as meperidine, fentanyl, methadone, dextropropoxyphene, and tramadol. So today we are going to discuss about the natural opium alkaloid morphine. In the second part, we'll be discussing about the other opioids, like the semi-synthetic opioids and the synthetic opioids. Now, the morphine, or the natural alkaloid, it is derived from the opium, which is a dark brown resin obtained from the poppy plant. The poppy plant is called as Papaver somniferum. Please learn the scientific name also. And it is obtained from the seed capsule. And this seed capsule usually contains two types of alkaloids, which is phenanthrene derivatives and benzoisoquinoline derivatives, of which if you see morphine and codeine, which are phenanthrene derivatives, they are analgesic, whereas the benzoisoquinoline derivatives like papaverine, noscapine, and even phenanthrene derivative like thebaine, they are non-analgesic. Now, there's a terminology called as opiates and opioids. So opiates are natural alkaloids, okay, which are derived from the opium. For example, morphine. Whereas opioids are any drug which will act on the opioid receptors. So it can be synthetic or natural. Anything that acts via the opioid receptors are called as opioids. Whereas the natural ones, which are obtained from the opium, are called as the opiates. That means all the opiates are opioids, but all the opioids are not opiates. That is, all the opioids are not natural. Some of them can be synthetic or semi-synthetic also. Okay, now let us learn about morphine in detail. So it was first isolated from the opium plant by Frederick Serturner and this was one of the first alkaloid in history to be isolated. So whenever somebody asks you the example of an alkaloid from the plant, morphine is an example, and it happens to be the first alkaloid that was obtained from the plant. And he had named it after the Greek god of dreams, Morpheus. That's the first picture that I showed you in the beginning of the class. Now, how does it act? The mechanism of action is very clear. It is going to act via the mu opioid receptors, and it is going to decrease the cyclic AMP production and cause the channel regulations, as already shown in the previous slide. And this is going to inhibit the transmission in the dorsal horn ascending pathway, and it will also stimulate the descending pain control pathway from the midbrain and brainstem, the dorsal horn of spinal cord. So you have to see that the ascending pathway is being inhibited, and the descending pathway, which is the pain control pathway, is stimulated by this method. Now we learn about the pharmacological actions of morphine. So first and foremost, we have to learn its actions on CNS. There are mainly two types of CNS actions: CNS depressant actions and CNS stimulant action. Under CNS depressant action, the first and foremost action, which is mediated via the new receptors, is analgesia. We already have seen that in the tabular column. So now when you ask what kind of pain is being relieved by morphine, so please concentrate. It is relieving the dull, poorly localized, visceral pain. Okay, than the somatic pain. I hope you already know what we mean by the somatic pain. Somatic pain means it is a well localized pain from skin and musculoskeletal structures, whereas visceral pain is the pain which is occurring from the internal organs, which is poorly localized, and it is often dull or cramping. Somatic pain, people can actually point out and show that this is the area where it is paining, but whereas the visceral pain is very dull and it cannot be clearly defined or pointed to. Then, when you compare the neuropathic pain versus the nociceptive pain, the morphine is relieving the nociceptive pain from the peripheral pain receptors better than the neurotic pain. Nociceptive pain is occurring by the damage of the nociceptors. Okay, that is by some kind of injury like a fracture or a burn or a scar or whatever. But neuropathic pain is obviously because of the injury to the nervous system and the nerves. So when you compare the nociceptive pain versus neuropathic pain, it is a nociceptive pain which is relieved better. And when you compare the visceral pain and the somatic pain, then it is the visceral pain which is relieved better than the somatic pain by morphine. Another important thing is that the not only the pain but the perception of the pain and the emotional component that is usually associated with the pain, that is the anxiety and the fear, is also altered by morphine, so that the pain is no longer felt as unpleasant by the patient, and the patient tolerates pain better. So this is much absent in the NSAIDs, because in the NSAIDs they only take care of the pain part. It is not taking care of the emotional component of the pain. Then comes the sedation. It can cause sedation, and it can also cause mood and subjective effects. So morphine calms the patient, so that will cause him to be in a state of euphoria. He will not be scared of anything. There is loss of apprehension. He's detached from the surroundings. He's in a dreamlike state. There is mental clouding and inability to concentrate. Now, when somebody is getting a rapid IV injection, just like the addicts and all, it produces a warm flushing of the skin and a very pleasurable sensation in the abdomen, which is referred to as high or the kick. Now, if some patient, if a person who is not having pain or apprehension, if that person is given a rapid IV injection, it will be felt as very unpleasant by that person. But in case of patients who are having severe pain or anxiety, or in cases of drug addicts, okay, the drug addicts, they perceive it as a very pleasurable sensation, very similar to orgasm. So the pleasurable effects of the morphine is actually learned by the addicts by using it again and again. Okay, and the next depression is sensory. It is also causing respiratory center depression in a dose dependent manner, and we said high doses it can cause to respiratory depression. And then cuff center depression, temperature regulating center depression, and vasomotor center depression leading to fall in BP. So these are all the CNS depressant actions. So one of the depressant action is good, that is analgesic, but all the other things are not really good for the patient. Now, what are the stimulant actions? So, it can stimulate the chemoreceptor trigger zone and cause nausea and vomiting. It can stimulate the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of the third nerve, leading to meiosis. So, the meiosis caused by the morphine is central in origin. It is not by acting on the iris muscles. It is because it is occurring at the central level by stimulating the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of third nerve. It can cause bradycardia by stimulating the vagal center, and it can also stimulate certain cortical areas and hippocampal cells, causing muscular rigidity and immobility. Now, the stimulant action of the CNS is over. Now, let us look at the neuroendocrine action. So, it can reduce the hypothalamic influence on pituitary and can lead to lowering of FSH, LH, ACTH levels, but prolactin and growth hormone levels can be traced. This is the neuroendocrine effect of the morphine. Now, what is the effect of morphine on the CVS? So, it can cause postural hypotension. There are reasons why it is causing postural hypotension. First reason is because of histamine release, which causes vasodilatation. We have already seen that it causes depression of vasomotor center that can lead to decreased BP, and it can also directly act on the blood vessels and decrease the tone of blood vessels. So these are the three mechanisms by which postural hypotension can be caused by the morphine. It can cause bradycardia, as I said, because of the stimulation of vagal center. Sometimes it can cause tachycardia, which can be a reflex response to the lowered BP. Very importantly, it reduces the cardiac work and can therefore have anti-ischemic property. This is mainly because of the vasodilatation, it causes peripheral pooling of blood, which reduces the preload on the heart. It also calms the patient and decreases the sympathetic stimulation and heart rate. That is why again the cardiac work is decreased. So this is also very important, that the effect on the cardiac work and how it decreases the cardiac work is very important, because you will see in the further slides how it is used in MI. There it will be, this point will come into play. Now, next on the GIT, it causes constipation, mainly because of the effect on the intestine, and also because of central action causing inattention defecation reflex. So, you know that the patient is already disconnected and he is like in a other euphoric state. So, he will be inattentive to the defecation reflex. That is one reason why the person can have constipation. So, there is a both peripheral reason as well as central reason why the person is constipated. Other smooth muscles, mainly it affects the biliary tract, causing biliary colic. It is also causing urinary bladder tone increased, which leads to urinary urgency and difficulty in micturition. There is also bronchoconstriction because of histamine release. So there is a contraction in most of the other smooth muscles. In the ANS, it can cause mild hyperglycemia because of central sympathetic stimulation, and there is a weak anticholinesterase action also. However, this action on the ANS is very negligible. Now, what is the pharmacokinetics of morphine? So, the oral absorption is unreliable because of a very high and variable first pass metabolism. It crosses placenta and can affect the fetus. This is also a very important point, and this is the reason why it should not be used in pregnancy by any chance. It is metabolized in liver to morphine 6-glucuronide, which is having the analgesic action. You have already learned it as an example of a drug which is active and it's converted into an active metabolite. And also it is getting converted to another metabolite, morphine 3-glucuronide, which is having a neuroexcitatory property. The plasma T half of morphine is 2 to 3 hours. The routes of administration involve mainly the oral, IM, subcutaneously, intravenous, epidural, and intrathecal, of which the oral one is less reliable because of the high and variable first pass metabolism. Now let us look at the adverse effects. Again, this is a very important section. So first we'll see the side effects, that is an exaggerated pharmacological effects of the morphine, which include sedation, mental clouding, lethargy, and other subjective effects, vomiting, constipation, respiratory depression, meiosis, and blurring of vision, urinary retention, and fall in BP. So you have seen these all these as the pharmacological under the pharmacological actions also. These are undesirable actions, and that is why we have clubbed them under the side effects. Then some people can develop idiosyncrasy and allergic reactions like urticaria, swelling of lips due to histamine release. This is not seen in all the people. It is very it's seen only in people with certain genetic makeup. Then it can cause apnea of the newborn if morphine is given to the mother during labor. So we should never administer this. And if suppose by mistake it has been given, naloxone should be injected in the umbilical cord to as an antidote. Now, tolerance. This is also very important, as we have learned already in the first slide that tolerance can develop to these tolerance develops if the drug is used repeatedly. Now, one important thing here is that tolerance develops to most of the actions of morphine, but not to the constipating and meiotic action. That means if the person is taking the morphine for a long time, he will require higher doses to have the same pain relief because he has developed tolerance to the analgesic action. However, he'll still continue to be constipated and meiotic. This is not a favorable tolerance. We would rather have tolerance developed to constipation and meiosis than to the tolerance developed to the analgesic action. So the therapeutic action, we don't want tolerance developing to the therapeutic action. We rather want the tolerance developing to the unwanted action. But here in this case, it is a reverse. Again, cross tolerance can occur among opioids. That means somebody who is tolerant to morphine can also be tolerant to other opioids like pethidine, heroin, etc. It is producing both psychological and physical dependence. And you already have learned about the dependence and all in the previous one of the SDLs. So I'm not going to mention about definition here, but you should be knowing by now that psychological if a patient, if person is psychologically dependent, he would develop drug-seeking behavior. And if he's physically dependent and if he's devoid of the drug, he'll develop withdrawal symptoms. So if the patient is suddenly stopped morphine, or if you are giving an opioid antagonist in an addict, they can develop withdrawal features like lacrimation, sweating, yawning, anxiety, fear, restlessness, mydriasis, tremor, insomnia, abdominal colic, diarrhea, dehydration, rise in BP, palpitation, and rapid weight loss. These are all opposite to what we have seen as the actions of morphine. So, how do you de-addict opioid? We'll learn about this in detail, but here I'm just covering it up for completion. So, what we have to do is we have to withdraw morphine and substitute with oral methadone. So oral methadone is actually a long-acting, orally effective opioid, and then we have to gradually withdraw methadone. We'll be learning detail about the addiction methods when we discuss about methadone. For the time being, you have to just know that how to de-addict morphine is to first withdraw the morphine and substitute it with a long-acting, orally effective opioid, that is methadone, and then subsequently gradually withdraw the methadone also. We can also give clonidine to suppress the autonomic features of withdrawal, which we have seen already, like mydriasis, restlessness, and all those things, BP, rise in BP, palpitation. All these are the autonomic features of withdrawal, which can be controlled by clonidine. And diazepam can be provided to give sedation, because you have seen that the person is having insomnia if he is undergoing withdrawal symptoms. Okay. Now, a person who has undergone having acute morphine poisoning, which can occur as a result of accidental, suicidal, or use, or by mainly seen in case of drug abusers, the toxic dose is 50 milligram of morphine intramuscularly, and lethal dose is 250 milligram. The manifestations are usually stupor or coma, flacidity, shallow breathing, cyanosis, pinpoint pupil, fall in BP, and shock. and death is mainly because of respiratory failure. So you're seeing exaggerated pharmacological actions of morphine here. The treatment is mainly respiratory support, maintenance of BP with IV fluids, vasoconstrictors, gastric lavage with potassium permanganate to remove the unabsorbed drug. And the specific antidote is naloxone, which is given zero point 0.4 to zero point 0.8 milligram intravenously, repeated every 2 to 3 minutes till the respiration picks up, and then repeated every 1 to 4 hours according to the response. Now, what are the precautions and contraindications? So, morphine should not be given in infants and elderly because they are more susceptible to the respiratory depression. They should not be given in people with respiratory insufficiency and bronchial asthma. Morphine is contraindicated in head injury because of several reasons. First, because it retains carbon dioxide, it can increase the intracranial tension, which can add to that caused by the head injury itself. You already know that head injury causes raised intracranial tension, and morphine by retaining carbon dioxide can increase the intracranial tension. It can also aggravate the respiratory depression, which is already present in patients with head injury. Vomiting, meiosis, and altered mentation, which is produced by the morphine, can interfere with the assessment of the progress in head injury. So we are always assessing head injury cases by using the Glasgow Coma Scale, and the parameters which are used in the Glasgow Scale will not be assessed properly because of the vomiting, meiosis, and altered mentation, which is induced by the drug itself. Now, it should not be given in hypotensive states because it can further cause exaggerate the hypotension. It should not be given in undiagnosed abdominal pain because morphine will relieve the pain and may just mask the actual diagnosis. In elderly male, it should not be given because there is a chance of urinary retention. Then hypothyroidism, liver and kidney disease patients, it should not be given. Or it should not also be given in unstable personalities because they are liable to continue with its use and become addicted. Now, some of the drug interactions, phenothiazines, tricyclic antidepressants, MAO inhibitors, amphetamine, and neostigmine can potentiate the morphine action by retarding its metabolism. Morphine, on the other hand, can retard the absorption of many orally administered drugs by delaying the gastric emptying. Finally, we look into the uses of morphine. The first and foremost use is as an analgesic. It is used for mainly visceral pain, traumatic, ischemic visceral pain. For example, in MI, it is used for relieving the pain, anxiety, and cardiac work. Already mentioned how it is decreasing the cardiac work. In renal colic, again, morphine can be used, but when morphine is used, though it relieves the pain, it can cause the spasm of sphincter of Oddi, thus increasing the biliary pressure. So to counteract that, atropine is co-administered with morphine because atropine will counteract the spasm of the sphincter of Oddi caused by morphine. The analgesic dose is usually 10 to 20 milligram intramuscularly or subcutaneously. Epidural, if you are giving epidurally the morphine, it can give segmental analgesia with not much interference with the motor functions or causing systemic adverse effects like sedation, respiratory depression, and all. And we have got newer modalities like patient control analgesia, where the patient decides his own need of analgesics and pushes a specific dose through an IV device under careful monitoring. You can see this is the patient control analgesia, where the patient can decide their analgesic dose and can push that through an IV cannula. Now, it is also used in acute left ventricular failure because it can decrease the cardiac work and decrease the preload on the heart by causing vasodilatation and peripheral pooling of blood, which we have already discussed earlier. It can shift the blood from pulmonary to systemic circuit, relieves the pulmonary congestion and edema. It also decreases the air hunger and dyspnea by depressing the respiratory center. It can cut down the sympathetic stimulation by calming the patient, thereby reducing the cardiac work. So this is also very important, how the morphine is important or useful in acute left ventricular failure. It is also used for anesthesia and pre-anesthetic medication to reduce the anxiety, provide added analgesia, reduce the dose of anesthetic required. And there's a special anesthesia or the IV anesthesia where high doses of morphine are given to produce general anesthesia. It's also used as sedative and anxiolytic in patients who are having myocardial infarction and internal bleeding. So before we conclude, I would like to mention that there have been repeated questions in the university where analgesics of choice in myocardial infarction has been asked. So whenever there is a analgesic of choice in myocardial infarction, it has to be morphine. And the reasons I've already mentioned, not only anxiety, but it also reduces the cardiac work. And I already told you how it reduces the cardiac work. At the same time, we have also taught you that the nitrates decrease the pain, is cause for pain relief, but nitrates are not analgesics and they're not considered as analgesics. Okay, though they reduce the anginal pain and pain, it does not belong to the class of analgesics. So whenever in the exam they ask you the analgesics for MI, it is always opioid analgesics like morphine and not nitrates. Okay, I hope you have understood the difference. And with that, we conclude the first part of the class. The second part will be continued later. Thank you.